Good morning, my love muffins. This is Reverend Sue from All Paths to God, recording live from my living room. I'm almost tempted to say Happy Memorial Day, but that doesn't exactly sound appropriate, considering that it's a time of remembrance for those men and women who have given their lives in military service. So let us just hold them in prayer and their families, those that are mourning and grieving the loss of them, in our highest consciousness of well-being. I'm blessed that my father came back from the war and lived to have 6 lovely children. This is my father. He just turned 96 on Easter Sunday. Isn't he a stud muffin? I don't know if that's appropriate to say either, but you know how we love a person in uniform. Well, it reminds me of a trip that some church ladies, about 9 of us, took in a van up to Washington, D.C., and we were stopped for potential speeding outside Stark, and I was driving, and a very dear friend, who will remain nameless, Linda bless her, was sitting right behind me in the seat when the officer came up to the window, and she leaned her little head in between the seat and the seatbelt and said out the window, "We love a man in uniform." It took everything I had not to crack up laughing. But we managed to get just a warning that day and told to behave ourselves, so I guess we do love a person in uniform. Memorial Day is a day of remembrance, a day we honor the men and women who sacrificed their lives for our freedom. So it's a day to wave flags, it's a day to visit cemeteries and grave sites and remember, and it's a day to give thanks and to count our blessings that we are Americans. We spiritual truth seekers, we new thoughters who absolutely believe in unity, are never totally satisfied loving and honoring only a small portion of our human family. The founding principle of New Thought is that we're all one, that we're all children of the one Creator, that everyone is our brother and our sister. So we're not so much one nation under God as we are God expressing through us, through all of us, through all peoples and all nations. So we also hold them in our consciousness of well-being today. Ernest Holmes reminds us that when by reason of enlightenment, of higher consciousness, we understand and live the truth of who we are and our oneness and our unity, we will no longer suffer the likes of war. But we owe our luxury to believe in something better and more, to those who would not settle for less, to those who dedicated and gave their lives to defending our freedoms. So while we honor the fallen once a year, their sacrifice is evidenced every single day. It's the reason that we're free to meet and to congregate and to worship our particular belief system, and we are blessed to have these freedoms, and people gave dearly for us to be able to have them. The origin of Memorial Day, according to Wikipedia, is actually the result of the emergence of higher consciousness. Memorial Day originated at the time of the Civil War, and it was later extended to honor all Americans who had sacrificed their lives in military service. There's many stories about the actual beginnings of Memorial Day, and dozens of cities and towns lay claim to being the birthplace. But most believe that the roots are found in practice of bereaved Southern women who were decorating the graves of their loved ones who had died in the Civil War. It was April 1863 in Columbus, Mississippi. And the Civil War was raging on, and a group of women met to adorn the graves with flowers. One elderly woman decorated 2 mounds in the corner of the cemetery. And the other women asked her what was she doing, because they were Union soldiers. She said, "I know. And I also know that somewhere in the North, there's a mother and a wife who mourns for them. And if we want someone to do this for our loved ones that lie in unmarked graves, then we must do it here." This gesture of remembrance and sympathy has been accepted as the beginning of the effort to replace hatred with love. And this loving deed set in motion what we would call our celebration of Memorial Day. We New Thoughters visualize a day when we forget about Memorial Day because we're too busy celebrating peace, and war has become a foreign concept in a distant past. But we have a lot of our own contributions to make before we get there. As Martin Luther King said, one day we must come to see that peace is not merely a distant goal we seek, but it's a means by which we arrive at that goal. If we want the world to be a better place, I can hear you all saying, we have to be a better person in it. We have to live in it better. Why? Because the world is made up of people. So we have to live it being this model, this example of goodness and kindness and compassion, if that's what we want to see in the world. We create a loving world only by living in it as love. And we create a peaceful world only by living in it as peace. And war or terrorism simply cannot survive in a global consciousness, in a global energy of peace. Peace that we're believing, that we're visualizing, that we're seeing, that we're feeling, that we're living right here and right now, regardless of circumstances to the contrary. Know the truth. Again, I heard you. And the truth shall set us free. We believe in a presence and power of something greater and wiser than we are, something that we call God. And we believe God's nature is love, is good. And we believe God's action is law, or to give. But thanks to free will, the most fundamental principle in the universe, God can only give to us or do for us through us. So God is always looking for a path through which to create ever-increasing goodness in our lives, in our experiences. But we have to create the path. This is the process of co-creation. The process of creation between the will of God and free will. Even the divine creator cannot move against our will. So we have to create a path, a channel, provide an opening through which grace and goodness and peace and harmony and joy and abundance can flow. And we do this with our minds, with our thoughts. Consciousness creates. That's our part. And Ernest Holmes often reminds us, God's part we can't do, and our part God won't do. God's part we can't do. We can't create. We can't make things. And our part God won't do. Our part is deciding, choosing what is to be made. Consciousness creates. We are conscious beings. And so we must always be conscious of something. And we get to decide what that something is. Each one of us is the owner of our own mind. We are free to think whatever we want to think. But we are not free to avoid the consequences of what we think. Good or bad, consciousness creates. And when we're conscious of wrong and bad, we multiply it and amplify it in our experience. We actually block the flow of good and right. Consciousness creates. Ernest Holmes says this is really all there is to it. We are sick, and we will remain sick until we know we are well. We are poor and will remain poor until we know we are prosperous. And we are hostile and we remain hostile until we know we are peaceful. While God and grace and good and well-being and prosperity and peace are always present, they're always streaming, they're always transmitting and broadcasting their vibration of goodness to us, God needs a path, a channel, a receiver through which to flow. It's kind of like TV and radio signals. They're always transmitting. But we need a device through which we can receive them and capture them. And we love our power devices, our remote controls for our TV and our automatic garage door openers and our Bluetooths that wirelessly connect us to our sound boxes. And we wonder sometimes, why don't they control everybody's? When I use my garage door opener, why doesn't it open everybody's garage door open? There are specific frequencies for each of these devices. So to receive them, to use them, to command them, to take advantage of their power, we need to tune in to that particular frequency. The signals are being transmitted. All we have to do is tune in. We turn the dial on the radio and search for that particular channel and bypass, move away from any static that has a tendency to interfere. Tuning in to God power is like our relationship with any other natural occurring phenomena in the universe. First, we discover it. Then we learn the laws that govern it. And cooperating with them, we bring it under our control and into our deliberate service. Marianne Williamson, who is Course in Miracles guru, likens the principle of the co-creative process to another invisible principle in the universe, electricity. She talks about it's like a house that's wired for electricity, and God is electricity. But even though the house is wired for electricity, if there's no lamp, if there's no light fixtures that are plugged in, we're still not going to have any light in that house. On the other hand, we can have all sorts of lamps and light fixtures, but if the house isn't wired for electricity, we're not going to have light. It doesn't matter the shape or the kind or the price or the quality of the lamp. What matters is that it's plugged in. It's a co-creative process between God, which is electricity, and us, which are the lamps. And that's our part in the co-creative process at any given moment in time. Just like electricity, grace and good need right connectedness to flow and to grow in our lives and in our experiences. So we plug in to God power and cast light here by aligning our minds and our hearts and our actions with higher truth, with God, with WGOD, Cincinnati, with God, where the grace and the goodness, the hits, just keep on coming. In any situation where we enable the increased flow of God to enter into our minds and our hearts, then we will see that increased goodness flow into our circumstances. So we constantly want to be tuning in to this God power, this constantly transmitting vibration in the universe from our divine creator. It reminds me of the commercial, plug it in, plug it in. That's the concept to hold in our mind this week. And how do we plug in to this eternal flow of good? Well, we have to dial up to it. We have to set our station, our receptors, to the same frequency, to the God frequency. God can never be less than all that God is, but we can always be more. And we have to plug in to this God power. We have to tune in. We have to dial up to it in order to plug into it. It takes our faith, our belief, our conviction. This is our tuning wand. The stronger the faith, the more expansive an opening or a path that we are creating in our own being. The more doubt, the more artificial the faith, the narrower that channel is for good and grace to flow. I know I've shared this story before, but it's such a perfect example. In the early days of our country, a traveler came to the banks of the Mississippi River, and it was urgent that he reach the other side. But there was no bridge, and it was winter. And the surface of the river was covered with ice, and he wondered, would the ice bear his weight if he tried to cross it? And he was a man of faith, and he had faith in God's guidance and God's protection and God's goodness. So he got down on his hands and knees, and he began hesitantly and cautiously creeping across the ice on all fours. He carefully distributed his weight evenly as much as possible, hoping to keep the ice from breaking beneath him. And about halfway across the river, he heard a loud noise behind him, and out of the dusk came a man driving a horse-drawn wagon of coal across the ice and singing merrily as he went. Here, the traveler was on his hands and knees, trembling in faith, not really believing the ice would hold him. And there went this man, his horses, the wagon, the coal, all upheld by the exact same ice, upon which this man was cautiously creeping. He claimed to be a man of faith, but he really wasn't plugged in to that truth of grace and good and God. It's a very challenging thing to do as we live in this world of physical experiences, whether that's with circumstances or things or people. We know there's many people that seem to waste no time at getting on our nerves. And simultaneously, we know we have to tune in and be an expression of that peace and love of grace and God if we actually want them to flow into this experience. And yet, we get so occupied in our feelings of frustration in the moment that we sometimes just can't shift that station, shift that dial. And that's okay. We are just awakening. We are just becoming aware. We are just learning about this power and this potential. And we have a lot of old habits to break and new methods of interacting to learn so that we can be free of these conditioned kind of responses. We can't make goodness happen. That's God's part. But we can create the right path, the right attitude, the right tendency of thought, the right mood in ourselves to let it happen naturally, to open this channel, to enable it to flow in increasing ways into our life. This is the most important war we'll ever wage. The one that takes place in our own minds and in our own hearts, in our own consciousness. Consciousness creates. Plug it in, plug it in. And as we plug it in, we will reap amazing benefits of amplifying and multiplying those experiences of goodness. So, are we plugged in to faith? Are they words that we speak, or is this an experience that we have? I'm sure many of you know this story from history, but in 1959, Jean-Francois Gravelat, who called himself the Great Blondin, was the first of many to cross Niagara Falls on a tightrope. Can you imagine that? Literally walking across Niagara Falls on a tightrope. His first crossing took him 20 minutes. He walked back in just 8 minutes. Well, this is the result of faith, not creepy crawling on all fours, but being able to walk and step out with more conviction and more confidence. During his subsequent performances, he crossed the falls on a bicycle, on stilts, if you can imagine that, at night, blindfolded. He swung by one arm. He turned somersaults. He stood on his head on a chair. And he pushed a stove across a tightrope in a wheelbarrow and cooked an omelet. Amazing. He asked one viewer one day who was in awe of his performances, "Do you believe I could take a fellow across Niagara Falls on this tightrope in a wheelbarrow?" And the man said, "Yes, I do." And he said, "Okay, get in." Wow. That's when I understand the difference between I have faith and I have faith. Actually, his manager, I forget his name, but he let him walk him across Niagara Falls on the tightrope, carrying him piggyback on his back. There was a man of faith. Plug it in, plug it in. You are the life and the love and the light of God. You are not making it so. It is so. So your mission, my friends, is to dial up your faith to this truth. Tune in to the God network, the constantly transmitting vibrations of grace and good. Tune in to WGOD, God, where the hits just keep on coming and the lights of the world just keep on shining. This is our mission for this week. Plug it in, plug it in. You may be worried about the state of our country and the world today, but it'll be okay because you're in it, my love muffins. Can I have an amen on that? You're in it and you're invested in this journey of growing goodness in the world. That must meet with success. Plug it in, plug it in. We can't go back and make a new start, but we can start now and make a new ending. We are the people. Now is the time, and this is the way. Namaste, my friends.